This is amazing. Okay. Obviously, given that I'm a technological Luddite, you probably shouldn't listen to anything I'm about to say for the next 20 minutes. But what I'm planning to talk about is using learnr, which is a package in R to create interactive tutorials. And I want to begin by introducing you to a teacher called Andy, who may or may not have some similarities to me.
Is your name Andy? I don't know how to answer that. Simple yes or no. Well, everyone calls me Andy, but my full name is Andrew, I think. So, no? Wait, yes.
So a few years ago, Andy was given a task at Sussex University, and that was to take over the postgraduate master's course in statistics. So like the core course that all our students do in autumn term on any master's program. That's around about 100 postgraduate students. And at the time in 2017, it basically the postgraduate stats courses were taught with, I think we used about 6 different software packages across the different modules. So we decided to rationalize it all. So I took over the core module, decided to teach that in R, and then any of the other modules that were not taught in R were going to get moved to R. And that was kind of the precursor to us changing our undergraduate curriculum in 2019. So we now, I mean, that was great timing because that was the year of 2 national strikes followed by a pandemic. So it's been a bit of a shit show, to be honest. Anyway, we have large practical classes, and especially at postgraduate level, students, but also at undergrad level as well, students have a lot of demands on their time outside of university. So this all seemed like mission impossible, to be honest. Then I discovered learnr and I thought everything will be fine. I can write interactive tutorials. We can use these as kind of self-paced, do a bit of flipped classroom stuff because we always have massive overload on room bookings and things like that. We literally don't have enough rooms to fit our students in. It will be good because you can introduce code exercises and things, so you'll get some active learning. You can embed quizzes in that are not assessed. I mean, you can assess them if you're technologically more capable than I am. And when we do have practical classes, we can get people working in groups and get some peer-assisted learning going on. So that was the idea. Seemed like it would all be fine.
I'm going to say that there is at least a chance that I didn't think this through completely.
So what is learnr? Essentially, it's a package in R that is designed for writing interactive tutorials. So think of kind of a handout where you can embed code exercises, and students can do them on the fly, and the code will get processed, and they'll see some result magically appear kind of in this kind of web-based handout. So tutorials can contain all sorts of things. Basically anything you can write in Markdown, you can stick in there. So equations, figures, text. You can embed code exercises. You can put quizzes in, MCQ style, Parsons problems, you know, all sorts of things. I mean, it's not fully encompassing, but there are various things you can do. You can put videos in if you want to have like a walkthrough of something in the middle of your handout. And you can also, if you happen to be able to program stuff in Shiny, you can embed your own Shiny apps and kind of applets in there to demonstrate various things. So it's pretty versatile. You can personalize the style of it as well. So there's a few sort of default styles that you can adopt, but if you know anything about CSS, which I didn't, and I still kind of don't, but I know a bit more than I did, you can make them look how you want them to look. So you can change, well, you know, colors and all that sort of thing. And you deploy these tutorials. You essentially have 2 choices. One is on something called a Shiny server, and the other is as self-contained R packages. So I'm going to attempt, I mean, this is going to go badly, obviously. I'm going to attempt to share a different screen. So let's see how that goes. Are you seeing something different now? Hopefully you are. Yeah. So this is R Studio. On the left-hand side, you can see my Markdown, and on the right-hand side, you should see the knitted tutorial. So this is what students would work through, and RStudio now has a designated tutorial pane. So once students have installed the package, they can kind of basically load the tutorial from within RStudio. But as I said, you can also stick it on a server. So for example, I don't know if any of these annotations are going to come out for you, but you've got are you seeing a green thing? A green line? Anyone?
I don't think I can see anything particularly green.
Okay, right, my screen annotation is not working. Don't worry. So let's just focus on the tutorial, shall we? So you can put sort of general text, you can put some code examples, blah 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 blah, and then you have these code exercises. So here's one that I've already propagated, and students can just run that and they'll get some kind of answer. Or you might set them a kind of a challenge where they have to write their own code, or maybe you put some partially complete code in there or something like that. You can put solutions there for them to try. You can put hints rather than solutions, so to give them a sort of kick in the right direction but not actually tell them the answer. And yeah, so that's the general idea. You can insert a quiz. Here's an MCQ quiz that's been embedded in there. So it's basically like an interactive handout. And you've got menus here for clicking around and doing various things. So you write it in Markdown, you knit it, and if you embed it in a package, students can kind of upload each tutorial in RStudio, or you can stick it on a Shiny server. Right, I'm going to have to switch back, attempt to switch back. So deploying learnr tutorials.
I have no idea what I'm doing, but I know I'm doing it really, really well.
So what happened the first year that I used learnr, Sussex University at the time had a kind of RStudio server in place, and I made the dreadful error of assuming that my university's IT infrastructure would actually support my teaching, and that died a lot during the first sessions. Were horrendous. Like everything went wrong. So I very quickly, over the space of about a week, decided that I would instead set up my own Shiny server, which you can do this, but what it involves is getting yourself a VPS and a domain name, learning some Unix so that you can do Unixy things, installing the Shiny server on your VPS, sending loads of emails to people who've written blogs about how to set up Shiny servers to beg them to help you as to why yours doesn't work. When that doesn't work, you then phone your brother who's got a degree in computer science and ask him why your Shiny server is not working. And when it finally works, you feel a remarkable sense of peace and wonderment, even though essentially everyone else has done all the hard work, not you. Basically, it was very stressful. There's some advantages to using a Shiny server. One is learnr has all sorts of advanced features, so you can kind of code check and give students feedback and things like that. You can actually assess them. There's a package, I want to say it's called learnr, but I'm not sure that it is actually. But anyway, there's a sort of associated package that goes alongside learnr, which allows you to kind of mark stuff that students do. I've never used that because we don't have a university Shiny server. I think there's probably all sorts of data protection issues with me storing it on my own server, and I also don't want to be responsible for losing 600 students worth of data. One of the big advantages is you can tweak your tutorials without students needing to reinstall your package. That can be quite handy when you mess something up. However, having your own Shiny server, I guarantee you, unless you're really into Unix, is the road to stress-induced burnout. I lived in a constant fear that my server was going to fail in some way and that I wouldn't be able to fix it. And I still do, because I sort of have this as a bit of a backup, just in case. And anytime anything goes wrong, I literally have panic attacks about what happens if I ruin my own server and I've suddenly got like 1,800 undergraduates complaining to the head of school about my tutorials not working. And also it costs me money to run. I literally pay to do my job by having my own Shiny server, so that's fun. So after the first year, I wrapped everything up into an R package. That was the adventure package, which it maps onto my textbook in adventure and statistics. And at the moment, I'm about 2/3 of the way through doing another package called Discover, which is going to go alongside the new edition of Discovering Stats using R. And what this involved is learning how to write an R package, which there's a talk on that later, so I won't go on about that, and learning a bit how to use GitHub, but it was a lot less painful than the Shiny server. Doesn't rely on a server, that's a good thing. It relies on the CPUs of individual computers, so you don't have this issue of like 600 students trying to access your server and it blowing up. Nowadays, it integrates really nicely with RStudio. They can just load up the tutorials from within that, and there's a an emotional cost to writing all these things, but no financial cost. It's harder to use the advanced learnr features, may even be impossible, but like I said, I've not really looked into that. If you need to update tutorials, you have to get everyone to reinstall it, which is a nuisance. So you need to try and get it right, or at least get it right such that it doesn't matter till the following academic year. And obviously you have to learn how to write a package, which is not, it's not a trivial matter, I would say. So I could sum up the first 4 years a bit like this.
Because we're smart.
Oh my God, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Out of the way! Yeah! Call an ambulance! A different ambulance, the one I ran into! The kamikaze!
So, it's kind of going all right now. We use these tutorials in a flipped classroom kind of thing, slightly differently at postgrad and undergrad level. So for the master's students, they literally kind of work at their own pace on a given tutorial within the practical class. So these are quite big groups, and it's usually only me and one other person teaching them. And they work in groups, and we wander around and help them when they get stuck, essentially. At master's level, that seems to work really well, and somewhat better than live coding, because you don't have the issue of people of different abilities, working at different paces. We get a lot more done. For undergrad students, we started off having this fully flipped. So they got a lecture on statistical content, then they were expected to go and do one of these tutorials before the practical class. Then in the practical class, we sort of reinforced some of the stuff from the tutorial. So the good things about this are students work at their own pace. Like I said, it helps with mixed ability classes, which we all have. As I said, at PG level, it works really well. You get groups of students, they help each other. You get a real sort of sense of community that you kind of don't get from just standing at the front of the classroom talking at people. And they get very personalized feedback, because on things they get stuck on, you actually have the time to sort of go and sit and talk to them about it while everyone else is happily, moving on at their own pace. The bad thing about it, at undergrad level, when we were getting students to do this as a fully flipped activity, as you might imagine, there's a portion of students who just don't do them, even though we had connected weekly assessments to try and encourage them to do it. So it's a little bit conducive to students just vanishing off the face of the earth and us not really realizing that's happened. So this year for undergrads, we're switching more to the postgrad mode, where these tutorials will be the bulk of what they're doing in their practical classes. And yeah, we'll see how that goes. Possibly not so well as at postgrad level. The other major, I think this is probably the major issue with this, is when students work in these sorts of tutorials, there is a disconnect between what they do in the tutorial and using RStudio. If they're working only in the tutorial environment, they're not getting practice at using Markdown. They're not getting practice at using code chunks. They're not getting practice at getting data in and out. So they get really good at coding, but then if you ask them to analyze something in RStudio, they don't know what to do, because it's quite difficult to teach things like getting data in within these tutorials, because the code exercises need to be kind of self-contained, and each code exercise doesn't remember what students have done before. The way we get around that is, first of all, we do some more intensive workshops early on to look at, this is at master's level, undergrad level. This is sort of covered over a whole term, but at postgrad level, we do some intensive workshops on getting data in and out, loading packages, using RStudio project files, sort of basic housekeeping. And then we get students to do the tutorials kind of in parallel with an RStudio session. So they're supposed to run 2 sessions. They have the tutorial up in one window, and then in another window, they'll have an R Markdown file, and they are supposed to keep a learning journal. So they're supposed to not repeat the entire tutorial in their R Markdown file, but they're supposed to, for example, get the data in and then make notes on things that they got stuck on, or things that confuse them, or things that they think are relevant to them, and to replicate some, but not all, of the things in the tutorial. I mean, they can replicate them all if they want, but the idea is they're sort of doing something in the tutorial environment and then taking it back into RStudio and trying to replicate some of it there. And that definitely helped a lot. We started doing that in year 2, and it sort of seemed to solve this problem. I mean, certainly it does at master's level. The other thing to be aware of if you use learnr is, like I said, with the code exercises, you can have pop-ups that give hints and solutions, and you have to kind of use these a bit carefully, I think. If you just put solutions in there, then a portion of students will cut and paste the code, but they don't actively learn how to produce the code themselves. They're not really thinking about it. They're sort of passively learning, which is bad. But if you don't have them at all, obviously it's completely unrealistic to expect students to, be able to generate, 8 lines of ggplot code or something like that. So you have to kind of do different things. So for example, using graduated hints that kind of say, hey, well, your first line is going to look a bit like this, and maybe have some blanks in it for them to fill in. Or if you just want to put the solution up there, have a solution with blanks. So, there's some X's, so they have to think about, they can't just cut and paste the code. They have to think about adapting it in some way, shape or form. So the short version of this is learnr is very powerful. You can create rich interactive teaching materials, embed video, code exercises. It's great. I really like it. And if you already use R Markdown, then it's pretty straightforward to get up and running. It's less straightforward to deploy them because you probably, I basically do it as an R package. Don't go down the Shiny server route, unless you happen to have one at your university and someone else runs it for you. And if you are going to use it, I'm not saying the workflow that we use is like the best. It's what we use. It works. There may be better ways to do it. But definitely have students not just working in the tutorial environment, have them take some of what they do out into like a learning journal or just something. So there's some kind of transfer activity where they're actually working directly in RStudio. And finally, obviously, I don't do all the teaching at Sussex, so I just want to thank and flag the fact that anything I've said may not reflect the views of my colleagues. These are all personal opinions. I just want to thank Lincoln, Vlad, Danielle, Jennifer and Milan, who do an amazing job at Sussex and are a great bunch. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. That was really great. And it's interesting to hear your experiences of using learnr, because we've been doing that this year in our first year course, and it's interesting to hear you having pretty much the same experience in terms of how the students are coping with it. Our server also fell over. In fact, we paid for one at RStudio, and it still fell over. So even chucking lots of money at it didn't help, but we got that fixed in the end. I mean, one thing we've done with ours is actually, it's interesting listening to you talk about the disconnect between the tutorials and the RStudio work. And we sort of had the learnr tutorial as the first thing they do, and then they pretty much just do the same thing again with a new data set and just have to go through a series of example exercises and basically try and remember what they did in the learnr tutorial, which a lot of them do forget, but we just get them to basically practice that again, is our experience. With the package then, so you were saying that any update to that is you need to have the students. You're basically using local installs of R Studio with your students, are you? So any update, they have to then update the packages that you're using for your learnr tutorials. Is that right?
Yeah. So we have yet to persuade the university to pay for any kind of R Studio cloud services. So we have students installed on their own laptops. So I mean, back when I first started teaching, our learnr behaved in a slightly different way. It's actually much more friendly now in that it kind of installs packages on a per tutorial basis. So if there's any dependencies, when you fire up a tutorial, RStudio automatically loads them, which is really handy. But if, for example, I've been like rushing to write a tutorial and I've written something wrong in the text, or I don't know, one of the code chunks doesn't, one of the exercises doesn't work for some reason because I've forgotten to set up a dependency, I would, obviously correct that. I'd have to re-upload it to, well, one's on GitHub, one's on CRAN, and then say to the students, oh, there's a mistake, can you please reinstall it, which, as you can imagine, creates havoc.
Yeah.
I mean, that's more of an issue, I guess, for the first years that you might be using it, because, your foibles get ironed out given enough time.
Yeah, so these things are pretty much never bug-free, are they? There's so much going on in them that we found that there was, even checking it 10 times, there was always something that he spotted later on in the class. I would say, having set up the RStudio server and set up the Shiny server this summer, the RStudio server is much easier. And so it might be worth having a crack at that, because that would help, right? Because then you're just updating the packages on the RStudio server, and that's your students are just logging in and seeing those changes. They don't have to worry about any install of packages or anything.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would be really interested in with other people that are using it is what their student numbers are like and how much it's costing. Because I think if I could, whenever we go to the head of school and say, hey, this would be really handy, and there's no way IT centrally are going to do it in a million years. The process is too bureaucratic. But we could probably get the school to pay for one, probably, and I think that would work. But whenever we go to the head of school and start moaning about this, he's quite reasonably will say, how much is it going to cost? And we're like, don't know.
Yeah, so RStudio, to pay for RStudio Cloud for all of your students is ridiculously expensive. We looked into it last summer, and we're talking £10,000 or more. To set up, we did pay for a subscription to the Shiny server, which was like $1,000 or something for the year, and that worked for our needs for hosting learnr tutorials this year, and obviously research Shiny activities as well. So John Tao's got a question. John, do you just want to come in rather than me reading it?
Okay, brief question. Would you be happy with the pick and mix approach where you're using learner, assessor, maybe other systems for helping students? Or do you think it's important that you choose one, for better for worse, you kind of stick with it, so that students get to understand what it is they're working with?
So when our undergrad curriculum changed to R, we did a sort of a big overhaul of kind of everything. And the idea was that we would use learnr tutorials, and that at least, because I don't teach I teach second year, I don't teach any first year, but the idea was that I would write at least some of all of them, so that there was some consistency in materials. So that was the plan. Obviously, as people come in to posts and they're teaching, they want to put their own stamp on things, and that's completely reasonable and understandable. So we do have a mix at the moment. So there are some learnr tutorials in all terms, but some people prefer to do different things. I'm fudging this because I don't really know what they do, but I know they don't use learnr.
Okay, thanks.
Here's a good question. Do you think the flipped approach to the lectures is something that you'll keep if we go back to face-to-face teaching, do you think that's, although you have said, I guess, that you sort of scrapped that a little bit in your...
Yeah, so the flipped thing is something we did pre-COVID, actually. So even when we taught SPSS, ironically, I wrote some SPSS tutorials using learnr, which students used to do as a flipped activity. So that isn't something we've done as a result of remote teaching. But because of remote teaching, I think we had more students than normal who disengaged, because there was no face-to-face teaching at all. So I think what might happen is, as we go back to face-to-face, I think we might be more likely to potentially reintroduce some flipped element for the undergrads, because some physical attendance, I think, probably makes it more likely that students will engage in some way. If they're getting stuck, it's easier for them to go and ask someone a question.
Okay, does anybody have any other questions for Andy before we move on? I'm trying to follow the chat, but it seems as if we've got a sort of discussion about certain things and then questions popping up. So sorry if I've missed anyone. Please feel free to unmute and ask a question if you'd like. Okay, in that case, we'll move on to Rob's talk. Thanks very much, Andy.
No worries.